Okay, colleagues, I think we can start. Welcome to this session on addressing human rights challenges through collective action in South Asia. My name is Matthias Towns. I'm the Deputy Secretary General of the IOE, the International Organization of Employers. A warm welcome here from the ILO, the International Organization, where we had today an important day because the new ILO Director General was just elected. The new DG is Gilbert Umbo, former Prime Minister of Togo, as well as former ILO Deputy Director General. So that is the reason why we're not in our headquarters in the IE, but here in the ILO. Collective action is a key theme in the human rights world. From the IE side, we are trying to push and promote this as much as possible. Employers' organizations have an important role to play. They're an important multiplier among the business community. They can reach companies no one actually other reaches. They are trusted partners for the companies. And they are, of course, also engaged in policy making in the National Economic and Social Council and together with their trade union counterpart. In this session, we want to better understand what are the do's, what are the don'ts, how you can replicate best practice in this region, and how you can connect the dots between what is going on in the different countries with the international level. For that, we have very important speakers. I don't go through them right now. My colleague Jason Pigat and Rita Yep will do so during their panels. And I can only tell you it will be extremely exciting. 2 words about the IOE. The IOE, the International Organization of Employers, is the largest network of the private sector in the world. Our members are the National Business and Employers Federation in 150 countries. And one colleague here, Vijay Pidate, is from our Indian members. And we're very proud to have EFI as our member in India, very much respected at the international level. The IOE, through the member federations, represent more than 50 million companies. So we are very well placed in order to organize and trigger this collective action at different levels, at international level, regional level, and national level. We do that together with our members, and we are really keen to learn and to hear from them today what is their experience in this regard. With that, I directly would like to give over to Jason Pigat, my colleague who is leading our work on business and human rights in the IOE. Only one thing I want to encourage you. If you have a question, if you have a comment, if you don't agree with us, use the chat function. I promise you, we will pick it up. We want to make this as interactive as possible, so that is your chance to engage. My understanding is many of you will join through YouTube. So then, of course, you have no possibility to use the chat function. But if you are here in the Zoom call, please do so. With that, over to you, Jason.
Thank you, Matthias. So good afternoon again, colleagues and participants. So it is my pleasure to introduce the speakers of our first panel about best practices promoting respect for human rights through collective action in the region. Our first distinguished speaker is Mr. Peter McAllister, Executive Director of Ethical Trading Initiative. Ethical Trading Initiative is a leading multi-stakeholder initiative working with business, trade unions and NGOs on human rights and responsible business. Previously, Peter established the International Cocoa Initiative, bringing together the global cocoa and chocolate industry to tackle child labor through business engagement and local partnerships. Peter has played a leading role in organizations for over 20 years, combining a strong appreciation of business imperatives with creating practical outcomes in line with the Sustainable Development Goals and UNGPs. Then we have Ms. Elaine McKay, who is the International Affairs Director of Japan Tobacco International. Elaine is a partner, GTI, is a partner company of IOE, and we are really proud about it. And Elaine is an international development specialist with global experience applying principles of human rights in the private sector. She has more than 20 years of progressive and demonstrated experience creating and executing CSR and sustainability initiatives. And last but not least, we have the pleasure to have with us Mr. Bidan Chandra Singh, Director of Campaigns from the Kailash Satyarthi Children's Foundation, India. He's the Director of Campaigns in Delhi, and he has worked on issues on human rights for over 20 years in South Asia region, and he has spoken at many panels and events before. He's currently heading the campaigns team in India, which focuses on local, national, and global action for bringing sustainable changes in child protection. So again, thanks all for being with us today, and I'll give the floor to Peter. Peter, please, over to you. Thank you. You are muted, Peter.
You'd think we would know all these things by now. Thank you very much. So thank you for that kind introduction. And as you said, the Ethical Trading Initiative brings together trade unions, business, and NGOs. We're about 22 or 23 years old. And the insight that brought us together originally, I think, still remains true, which is that by bringing those parties together, we are able to create a better understanding of issues and find better solutions than any one of those groups on their own. And of course, you will all know that there is greater pressure on business to not only understand human rights, understand its impact, make a contribution to things like the Sustainable Development Goals, which are not typically normal business practice. So there are a number of things that are in the wider business sphere that require collaboration, require insights from different parties, and require that opportunity to develop trusting relationships. UN Guiding Principles we've talked about requires human rights due diligence. That is not a passive process. That is supposed to be an active process where you understand your intersection with different communities, different rights holders, how they may be experiencing that relationship through your value chain, for example, or through your products. Due diligence is being translated into a regulatory requirement. So this is going from soft law into now a requirement. You're seeing the EU directive, which is taking that forward, but we've also seen the law in Germany and we've seen the law in France. But as we know, many human rights issues are a function of some quite complex circumstances. They look at entrenched sector practices along the value chain, but they're also a factor of weak governance or the absence of decent policy. They may be also a factor of the local cultural context or traditional practice. These are not easy issues to identify and unpick and then tackle. So for an individual business to understand, get a grip of these issues and be able to tackle them on their own is quite a challenge. Even the really big guys will struggle at times. And that really is, I guess, where the basis for collective action starts. We know that the typical audit-based compliance systems have a role, but they also have their limitations. And we know that when we come across these difficult underlying issues, it's very difficult for an individual business to tackle that. Whether that is to do with migrant labor, whether that is to do with the problem of audit fatigue, whether that's to do with living wages. We know these things are not in the gift of an individual company, as big as it may be, to understand and tackle. Equally, there's a risk to an individual business if it tries to tackle some of these difficult issues as a lone ranger. They raise their profile, they're often in that sort of media campaigning environment. So there's a risk to trying to do too many things on your own. So what does collective action add? We think it adds greater leverage to address an underlying issue. It adds a stronger voice in influencing policy, and that can be international level or it can be in a national context. It helps alignment along the value chain and then between different firms. It helps avoid duplication and confusion. Lots of suppliers will often say they're subject to a plethora of initiatives that are often not aligned well and less effective, therefore. It means business associations can play their full role by convening businesses, bringing them together, helping articulate that voice. And for an MSI like us, it means we can bring non-business actors. We can bring their insight, we can provide guidance through development, and we can provide services through their networks. All of this helps reduce the risk profile for any one company, and we believe is more effective on these complicated areas. So what makes collective action work? So in our 20-odd years of experience, I think there are some things which may be obvious and maybe some things that are less obvious. Clarity on common objectives and aims sounds simple, but my experience from COCO is that probably took us about 5 years of the initial existence of the institution to really get to grips with where does the business, human rights, government, and civil society objectives align, and where therefore could we take those things forward. So it's really important to be clear about what are the common objectives in that collective action piece of work. Something I'm going to describe is everybody's got to give a little. When you start to work in a collective action, no one gets to control the narrative, and you have to be willing to hear from others. You have to be willing to cede a level of control, which is not always easy for business, and you have to be willing to listen to your critics. Equally, we would argue trade unions and NGOs have to be willing to say that business is part of the solution, as well as maybe sometimes contributing to the problem. And that idea of partnership and collective action is only going to work when there's a recognition that everybody brings something to the table. The other thing I would say is that the best solutions are co-created and when there is skin in the game. This is not about nice to have projects or things that look good on PR. Either people are committed and they've got skin in the game and then it's a business imperative, or it's unlikely to stay the test of time and unlikely to succeed when you come across the sort of difficult barriers and the challenges. I would also say it's important to set clear milestones and KPIs. Inevitably, with many of these projects, there's the sort of excitement at the beginning and then the disappointment when things don't get solved quickly. So knowing that you can measure success, knowing that sometimes just engagement and just learning language as an important step forward, it's important to celebrate that, recognizing that sometimes these journeys can be complicated, they can be challenging, and they can take a long time. Mutual accountability. It's important once you start to set objectives and recognize that we will succeed and fail together in collective action, that there is that honesty, that willingness to hold each other to account, that willingness to face into those difficult subjects. Just came off a board meeting yesterday and we had a very intense conversation about what is the right approach for responsible business in Myanmar. And across our tripartite groups, there were very strong, very different opinions, but willing to face into those and willing to work through those conversations matters. A safe space, I think MSIs and people like the IOE can offer that safe space where people can be frank and open, have the difficult discussion without worrying about whether that's going to end up in the media or on a tweet. And that's a thing that I think MSIs, when they do that well, protect that space to bring different people into a conversation, knowing that they can be trusted. And last, and I guess I would say this, wouldn't I? You need an adept facilitator. Inevitably, these things are conflictual. We're tackling human rights issues. We're tackling issues that can be challenging for business, that often require, as I said, staying power and challenging conversations. So a facilitator that can allow that to move along, can help identify and overcome obstacles, and can make sure that there is a clear formulation of objectives, progress, and engagement. So those are some of the things we've learned over 20 years, and that we believe what makes collective action important and what makes it function. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a great, Peter. And let's say we can highlight two things that you said. First, the recognition that everybody brings something to the table. This is key to advance the business and human rights agenda. And secondly, the fact that we need to have safe spaces, and IOE is definitely committed to provide that. Thank you. Now over to you, Ellen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here again today. I think echoing what Peter said, there is no government, no sector, no industry, no individual that can deal with the complex, intractable social issues that we face. In fact, unless we recognize that, there is no space to have a conversation about collective action. In our environment, we employ more than 44,000 people, but we have a supply chain that includes 73,000 directly contracted growers. In fact, of those, more than 15,000 are in Bangladesh. So our supply chain is nuanced and complex. But I want to share with you some of the lessons that we've learned in addressing what our complex issues are, but also in seeking to address them from a collective action perspective. Firstly, one of the lessons that we've learned is that you have to align with international goals and standards. So we lead our response based on the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, but also in terms of the OECD FAO guidance on how to do this with respect to agricultural supply chains. We also align our response in terms of globally accepted conventions like the ILO Convention number 182 and 138, which relates specifically to child labor. But broadly speaking, we have a very simple 5-step framework. The first step is identify what the issues are. In order to do that, we make sure that as an industry, we nuance how we do impact assessments, because the voice that's important is the rights holder voice. The rights holder does not necessarily speak English. The rights holder is not sitting in a beautiful office in Geneva. So we make sure that we work with others who are best placed to do that on our behalf, to get the rights holder's opinion. We also train our leaf technicians to understand what the standards are so they can translate what that looks like in a farming environment. It's different from being in a factory where you can verify age by people providing you birth certificates. This is a farm-based context. Once we understand what the issues are, we prioritize and we work with our local leadership team to do that. And it's interesting, the rights holder prioritizes things differently from the way we do. So for example, the environment is a huge issue in agriculture, but we have to address those priorities based on the view of the rights holder. And again, issues like policy reform, land, access to land, these are huge issues to community members. On that basis, we build a plan and we respond. Some of the easy ones to do are child labor, because it's wholly acceptable for children to work in agricultural communities. But we teach communities the difference between child work and child labor, and we improve it at area-based level. We also work with trade unions when it comes to issues like freedom of association and collective bargaining. Then we measure the impact of our interventions and we communicate. And this is where it's important for us to work together, because nothing is unique in an agricultural supply chain. We face the same issues, but we have to measure against the same standards. We have really good examples of industry collaboration. Peter described one with the International Cocoa Initiative. We have one that we support through the Eliminating Child Labor in Tobacco Growing Foundation, but also through a process we call Sustainable Tobacco Production that we work with an industry. But there are no good examples of industry collaboration when it moves beyond the product. And this is important, because if you deal with agricultural supply chains, what you need to deal with is at an area-based level and at a root cause-based level. So we encourage collaboration and work with others to make sure that we don't displace problems when we fix an issue on one farm and children just walk onto another where the standards are not clear. Importantly also, collaboration involves government. In many countries where we operate, governments are fragile, and access to things like education is not standard. I go to Malawi, more than 200 kids are sitting in a class. Policy reform is key. And what's even more important than policy coherence is key. So for example, in a country like Malawi, a child of 14 is legally able to leave school, but we don't want 14-year-olds in hazardous conditions on farms. So we work with governments to make sure that remedy is also embedded as part of policy reform. Interestingly, it's important to start somewhere. And often what helps is collective action helps you to start, helps you to understand and learn from the lessons of others. But when laws change, companies get scared and they follow a risk-based approach. The Japanese, by contrast, offer a Kaizen philosophy, which is continuous improvement. We assume something is going to go wrong and we choose to work with others to improve it. That is the essence of sustainability. Agriculture will be a commodity long into the future. The more we work together, the better we can improve the situation, not just for our growers, but for the communities that are so dependent on tobacco. But I would like to have one last appeal. When it comes to issues of remedy, we need collective action more and more. Because today, remedy is understood to be financial remedy. We need clarity to understand what it looks like at policy level, what it looks like at financial level, what it looks like in terms of promises never to repeat the infringement again. And when we have collective action insofar as remedy is concerned, we can add up what the private sector is doing to address these complex social issues. And I do hope that this is part of a conversation, especially in a country like Southeast Asia, where these are so important, as we've learned them in Africa. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ellen. You're totally right. I mean, the policy and legal environment that enables sustainable business and also human rights is key, notably to access to remedy. So thank you for your contribution. Now we have the pleasure to have, Bidan. I hope Bidan is connected now. Yes, great. Hello, Bidan, and over to you. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Jason. So let me start with, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone from all over the globe, and thanks for the opportunity. I come from an organization called Kpis at Children's Foundation. So if you look at the one of the staunch human rights defender who got the 2014 Nobel Peace Prize was Kpis, and his effort, he got, the Nobel Peace Prize for his effort to free children from exploitation. I overlook the entire campaigns in India and globally. I'm also been part of the 100 million campaign to reach out to businesses, universities, and particularly youth all over the globe. We are talking, and let me put things in perspective. We are talking about a, industry, and I'm talking about human trafficking. Yeah, is estimated to be, $150 billion global industry, and the $1 billion industry thrives and reflects the enormity of human rights abuse globally, and children are mainly, if you look at children are mainly trafficked for forced labor, sexual exploitation, domestic labor, and forced begging criminality. And particularly when I come back to India, India has put together some of the most progressive legislations, such as Child Labor Prohibition and Regulation Act 1986, Juvenile Justice Care and Protection Act 2000, Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Act 2019, Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act. So we have all the legislations in place. And as per, and so if you look at the legislation, implementation of these legislations are only going to happen through a collective action. And if you look at India, India census, the last census which we did in 2011, the data, 10.1 million children are in child labor. And the last speaker, you were talking about the sector, agriculture sector. If you look at, there are different industries, and agriculture is one of the sectors where huge in child labor which occurs. And the latest global, estimates include that 160 million children were in child labor at the beginning of 2020. So these are the enormity of the problem. And when we are talking about, I'll share one of the initiatives which we did last year, and going to the UN guiding principles. When we talk about business and human rights, UN guiding principles, there are 3 pillars we are talking about. State must protect human rights, business should respect human rights, victims need access to effective remedy. And in this initiative, the initiative is called Survivor-Led Intelligence Network. So how do you reach out to the criminals? When we're talking about the trafficking industry, it's a very, huge, they don't have a face, so to say. So how do you reach out to them? So breaking the nexus of trafficking, and collectively with government, with, industries, businesses, everyone coming together. Community. So the initiative is called Survivor-Led Intelligence Network. So our sister organization, Bachpan Bachao Andolan, had rescued more than 1 lakh children in the past, 3 decades. So these, children now is their, youth. They volunteer to be part of this network. So the network is led by the survivors themselves. So when we're talking about victims, the victims who had gone through this trauma are leading the network itself. And we piloted this in one of the most trafficking prone, areas, states in India. And we initiated this model in around 20 districts, which is, so to say, particularly in the village of India. And if you look at the first step was involving the victims, which we did. That's where survivor-led intelligence network. They are the leader. They involve thousands of volunteers. The second step was, making the community aware. So when we are talking about collective action, one of the foremost effort of collective action is to, make the community aware about what we are dealing with and how do we really need to collectively work to, reach out a solution, Ellen, which when we're talking about. So the second step was awareness, a huge awareness program, traditionally using poster, street theater, pamphlets, going around villages. And those were the times when we were able to build the relationship with the communities. And at the end of it, if you look at the result, when we're talking about the result, we were able to, and these are the way the industry is faceless. Our volunteers and survivor leaders, few to say, is faceless. Because when we are talking about, the community, now the information is coming from community around, these are the traffickers, they have taken the children to these and these places in the community. Can you help us trace our children? And that's where the next step comes, involving the law enforcement agencies and particularly the police. And we have a very wonderful experience in terms of the way we were able to collaborate with the government in India, particularly in this campaign. And a result, if you say, in just last year, we were able to identify the survivor-led intelligence network. Through the community, we are able to identify around 1,000 traffickers. And when we are talking about 1,000 traffickers, one trafficker can, one trafficker, when he was arrested in India, he said that in my lifetime, I have trafficked 30,000 children. So that's the enormity. So one trafficker might represent a nexus of traffickers. So the survivor-led intelligence network was able to identify around 1,000 traffickers, more than 1,000 traffickers in just 1 year. 15 days of intensive program. If you look at the COVID-19, after COVID-19, there were, hugely children were trafficked back to the larger cities, and particularly in different industries, because these are the cheap labors you provide. Just in 15 days, we were able to get 120 traffickers arrested and 350 children rescued by this effort. Now, coming back to this story itself, this story for us is a story of hope in terms of how community can come together to find a solution. And when we are talking about community and collective action, Peter, you were talking about involving the businesses, government, everyone, so everyone is part of, if we are part of the problem, we need to be part of the solution as well. And for me, particularly, leading this entire initiative was so we are going to scale this up. Now, if you look at the business aspect, in terms of the supply chain, when Elaine, you were talking about, we really need to invest our energy in terms of the supply chain. And that's where the, we as an organization, Kailash Satyarthi Children's Foundation and other NGOs and can come handy and can be supportive in terms of there are, supply chain again is a very huge, it's very complicated in itself, Ellen, when you're talking about, but we really need to grab this opportunity and make this, use this opportunity to find a solution. So thanks, Jason. I'll stop here for now. I just wanted to share this initiative. Thanks.
Thank you, Bidan. And an highlight from your presentation is the need to raise awareness. I think both at company level, but also in civil society, also for employers federation, this is key, and a huge has already been done, and we will be definitely committed to provide more. I have one question in the chat for you three panelists, which comes from, give me a second, Sarah. What can human rights NGOs do to contribute to the collaborative process? So maybe I think, Peter, you can maybe be first shortly, and we will do a quick run to the tab, and then we will move on to the second panel. Thank you.
Make sure I unmute myself. I mean, there's a lot they can contribute, because they can contribute expertise, insights, good practice, guidance. I think that the challenge often we find is that these parties are not used to talking to each other. So there's, how do you make the introductions? How do you build trust? How do you build confidence? And sometimes also, how do you even get the language right? Because business language is not human rights language, and human rights language is not business language. So I think there's a lot that both parties have to learn from each other. It is not always easy if it's new territory or it's new issues. And again, sometimes that requires a level of courage and bravery from both parties. And sometimes it can be done through a third party like IOE, for example, or Ethical Trading Initiative, if we know both parties. But our experience has been that when that dialogue is open and, and based on trust, both parties benefit. The human rights organizations benefit from an ability to engage business in terms of being a partner in tackling human rights, and business gains from understanding from a different perspective how their world and how the world they intersect with looks. That will be our experience.
Thank you. Maybe Bidan, and then we will finish with Ellen.
I think I agree with Peter. I like to add I think creating models and involving businesses and other stakeholders together is a key, part which the NGOs can play in defending human rights. And I agree in terms of the language. However, I'll also, say that, we need to come together to find a common language as well. And I think we need to take risk, risk in terms of exploring common language, risk in terms of exploring common models. So we really need to come together, and collaborate. There are huge legislations. The governments are moving to, ahead in different parts of the country. There are lots to be done, I acknowledge. But I think there are opportunities, and we need to grab those opportunities by coming together.
Thank you, Bidan. And Ellen, please, you have the last word.
Awesome. I'm going to try and use alliteration based on a word I heard earlier. The first is NGOs can help us spread awareness. They speak a local language. They understand local contexts and local community needs. Awareness is key. Second thing they can help us do is align efforts. You cannot have, in very small communities, one group of kids getting vouchers, one group of kids getting school books, another group of kids getting something else, and one community getting nothing. We have to get to a place where we're working on root causes and working together. So there you have awareness, alignment of effort. The last thing is a sense of accountability. There is a mechanism that's missing between business and communities. If they can bridge that gap and support accountability and holding businesses accountable around a table rather than in the press, I think we can go a long way. So those would be my three. Thank you very much, Jason.
Excellent, thank you. Well, thank you, Len. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Bidan, for your participation. Really appreciate that. And now let's move to the second panel. Rita, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready indeed. Thank you, Jason. Very interesting first panel. But we're going to carry on the conversation and discuss about working together and how collective actions can be strengthened in the region. We have three distinguished speakers with us today. Thank you so much. I warmly welcome you for joining us. First, we have Mr. Vijay Padate. He's an advisor for Employers Federation of India, EFI, which is a member of IOE. He was previously served as the Director General of EFI, and he has more than 40 years of experience in personal management and industrial relations. During his time, he has acted as the lead negotiator for employers on wage negotiation and has contributed to the development of 4 labor codes in India concerning wages, social security, industrial relations, and safety and health. The second speaker we have today is Mr. Dan Reed, the Director of Better Work. He is in charge of overseeing the program's operation in Bangladesh, Cambodia, Haiti, Indonesia, Jordan, Nicaragua, and Vietnam. As well, he has been driving the change in the garment sector at the international level. He has more than 20 years of experience advocating for good working conditions in the garment industry. Last but not least, we have Ms. Linde Komrom, President of Amphori. She is leading the Global Business Association for Open and Sustainable Trade. She has extensive experience in human rights and responsible conduct, and she is creating positive impact by supporting business to enhance responsible conduct in the supply chain. Prior to this role, she served as the Global Labor and Human Rights Director at Samsung Electronics and was previously the Secretary General of International Organization of Employers, IOE, in 2015 to 2018. Without further ado, I will pass on to our first speaker, Mr. Vijay Padate. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Rita. I hope I'm audible. Yes. Rita, Jason, thank you so much. Good evening from Mumbai, the financial capital of India. At the very outset, let me thank the organizers, the sponsors. We can't forget them. We must remember them very well. And because of whose and the hard work of the organizers and the sponsors and the IOE team, the ILO team, and of course the support team that they have, we are all together over here to share our views. It's a privilege to be here, ladies and gentlemen. During my presentation, I intend to share with you the collective actions with human rights at its core by the government and private enterprises during COVID-19. During COVID-19 infections. Let me begin. Can you open up the first slide, please? Yes. Let me give a brief about India, very quick brief. It is a multi-party federal parliamentary democracy with a bicameral legislature. That means we have two houses, the lower house and the superior house. There is a president elected who is the head of the parliament, and there is a prime minister who is the head of the government. India has 28 states, 8 union territories, and every state and every union territory, which is very important, have a high degree of autonomy and have primary responsibility for law and order, including matters of labor relations for private enterprises. Human rights in India, despite its status as the world's largest sovereign, secular, democratic republic, is an issue complicated by the country's huge size, remote locations, large population with multiple social groups, diverse cultures, historical complications. To be brief, as on January 2022, so far as the industry registrations are concerned, as on January 2022, there are over 1.43 million registered companies. When I say registered companies, that means a company which has 10 or more employees. Less than 10 employees, you don't bother to register themselves. We have 275 million workmen and 127 million male workmen and 127 million female workmen. When it comes to India, million is not necessarily a very large number. Next one, please. Yeah, these are the COVID. I must mention what happened during COVID. As you can see, the recovery rate for India in COVID infections is pretty good. Over 99% people have recovered. The 0.51 million deaths is a government figure. According to economists, however, the figure is 10 times more. Next. Next, please. Yes, this is something great that government has done. While our government was very fast in locking down the nation with a 3.5 hours short notice, it was rather slow in coming out to the help of people in terms of vaccinations or in terms of other supports about which I'll mention. I will urge, ladies and gentlemen, to go through this particular story, and which will tell you what mammoth effort thereafter the government of India has done in vaccinating people across the nooks and corners of the country. Next one, please. But India has done very well in terms of supporting the mankind across the world. As of January 16, as on 16th of March 2022, our government was able to supply 167.2 million vaccine doses to 98 countries. Small countries like Sri Lanka, was helped, Bhutan was helped. Similarly, large countries like Canada or Australia was helped, including Ukraine and Mongolia. Next one, please. Right. Economy was very badly affected. GDP going down, inflation going up, millions of people losing jobs. Government did its best in helping people below poverty line. On the right hand side, what you see, government support to BPL people. BPL is below poverty line people. Well, government was slow, but then it did huge amount of work. A lot of people will reached out. Yes, all each and every person could not unfortunately be reached out because of the everywhere it was not possible for the government. But government came out with free rice, wheat, free vaccination, free cooking gas also, and a rural employment guarantee scheme across the country. The government also supported industry with multiple schemes. In one of the schemes, I may point out, for example, the last second last bullet, Atmanirbhar Bharat Yojana. Over there, the government helped companies employing up to 99 people with provident fund contribution for a period of 6 months. Our provident fund contribution is about 12%. So 12% for the employees and 12% for the employer was both contributed by the government for 6 long months. Industry because of this mad epidemic, I'm using a very strong word, I know that, the economy suffered, government suffered, industry suffered, individuals suffered. On the right hand side, you see a picture over here, wherein the children also suffered, and the students had to do innovative ideas to catch up with their lessons. Well, there was a work from home for the employees. The children had to find out locations somewhere on the road where they would get internet connectivity, because a lot of houses are poor and don't have internet connectivity in their house. This picture shows a father supporting his daughter in heavy showers, wherein she is trying to catch up with her studies lessons. So this is something very positive that came out. The resilience of the parents, the strong resolve of the parents to help their children to catch up with their education, whether boys or whether girl children. Next slide. I think this kind of initiatives of the parents will support India as India progresses ahead. This is a slide on acceptable conditions of work so far as the industry is concerned. Next one or two slides will be based upon what so far as our labor law regimes are concerned. I will highlight important things only. I will not read out everything. There is no need. So far as our industry is concerned, we have the law mandates maximum 8 hours of work, 48 hours of work week. After every 5 hours of work, the law mandates 30 minutes of break, recess break. The union government sets a safety and health standards, but the state governments are authorized to set standards for. Yes, Jason, I notice your precaution. In that case, Jason, if I am running out of time, I will take 1 sec over here. All state government laws mandate paid holidays. For example, the Maharashtra Shops and Establishments Act mentions 8 paid holidays. And I particularly mention this because I come across a report of a country report on India, which somehow inadvertently mentions that our country does not mandate paid holidays. Jason, can I request you to go to straight away go to slide number 10? Okay, slide number 10 over here. I wish to mention that the Social Security Code has widened, the new Social Security Code that is coming in has widened the definition of employees to include interstate migrant workers, construction workers, film industry workers, and platform workers. It has provisions for the registration of all 3 categories of workers: unorganized workers, gig workers, and platform workers. Because of the extension of Social Security Code to gig workers, they'll become eligible for life and disability coverage, maternity benefits, pension, life insurance, disability insurance, provident fund, and skills upgradation, etc. Can we go to slide number 12, the last slide of my presentation? I will omit all of this. Slide number 12. Okay, over here I wish to mention what mammoth job private industry has done during the COVID time in helping the workmen. Over here in 2020, we conducted an industry response to COVID-19. The number of this research work was done by EFI in collaboration with ILO. In 2021, again, in collaboration with ILO, we did a best IR practices during COVID-19, and we had 11 participating establishments. 2021, EFI again did another mammoth work in terms of the Employee Relations Excellence Awards. The point that I want to mention over here, in this 2021, we closely collaborated with 26 private industrial enterprises. These enterprises employ 500,000 employees. They have 269 either manufacturing locations or service locations. Their total turnover is about 500 billion. Despite pandemic times, these establishments did not go away, and they fulfilled their commitment of signing long-term wage agreements with the unions. Now, there were 3 establishments wherein the long-term wage settlements were expiring, and the companies engaged with the unions in signing the long-term wage agreements. Long-term wage agreement in India means minimum 3 years, is a range of 3 years to 10 years. 24 establishments out of 26 have laid down grievance procedures, and 23 establishments out of 26 have unions. The purpose of giving these details that is private industry is not shirking its responsibility and engaging in collective actions, in helping the workmen, engaging with the union, engaging with the government, and doing what is necessary to be done in the interest of the human rights. That's all. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Vijay, for sharing with us great insights on what happened to.
You're inaudible. You are mute, Rita.
Am I mute? Can everyone hear me?
Can't hear you.
Yes, I can hear you, Rita.
Okay, you can hear me. Okay, great. Thank you, Vijay, for sharing with us the insights. I'm going to ask Jason to share with us all the participants with the slides so that we can have the details. I'm going to pass on to Dan Reeds to speak. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the IOE for the invitation to speak at this event. I think this meeting poses an interesting and timely question about the potential for regional cooperation. But I guess, like many good questions, the answer isn't altogether obvious, at least not to me. I think within the garment industry, at least, which is the major focus of my work on behalf of the ILO, there isn't, in fact, so much regional cooperation, and it's rare that human rights challenges have been framed or looked at through the lens of regional cooperation. So I think it's important to say that limited experience of what's worked and worked well at regional level makes it quite hard to answer the question about how collective action can be improved and strengthened. But at the same time, I think other speakers have already said that there's so many issues and rights challenges that would benefit from greater cooperation. And therefore, there are many opportunities to explore how it can be strengthened, including at the regional level. And while the industry does not yet organize on regional lines so much, there are growing economic reasons for it to do so, to consider closer cooperation to strengthen structural weaknesses. I think this is particularly important as the industry builds back after the pandemic, for example, on raw material supply and trade in component parts. So all to say, I think you're posing an interesting question and a timely question, and I really look forward to the discussion. My starting point for the comments I wish to make really are with my own program, the experience of running the Better Work program in the global garment industry. The key goals of this program are to improve working conditions, access to rights in firms in the supply chain of the global garment industry, while also strengthening the competitiveness of firms in supply chains. And our work is all about collective action. We bring together over 100 global brands and thousands of suppliers in the industry, together with governments, employers and workers, organizations in garment producing countries. And Better Work typically creates one mechanism to assess working conditions in garment factories, a mechanism that's transparent and understood by stakeholders in the industry, and creates common tools to support remedy at enterprise level that are also understood and owned by different stakeholders. And while global brands can certainly incentivize and promote good employment practices with their suppliers, I think my takeaway from running this program is that lasting change on rights at work is implemented and owned by the rights holders themselves. It's by the workers and the employers in workplaces. And sustainable change is enabled through stronger social dialogue, through transparent observance of rights and laws, and by inclusive, equitable workplaces in which, particularly in the garment sector, women are equally represented in the decision-making processes at every level. So important to say, change processes are inherently local at enterprise, sectoral, national level. But these processes can certainly be enabled, supported, informed by exchanges of good practices, of strategies, of sharing knowledge and techniques between countries and between industries. Better Work is now working with 3 countries in the South Asia region, 6 in the wider Asia region, 8 worldwide. And we regularly host fora to support exchanges of practice between national level programs. And these are increasingly important for sharing tools and approaches, examining what works and introducing them to other contexts and other countries. And I think it's important for me to say that employers' organizations and governments are increasingly asking for more opportunities to learn from outside their own industry. And that's clear to us that that's a growing demand as the complexity of the challenges they face, we think, increases. So IOE's engagement in that and helping that in terms of its convening role of business and employers' organizations is certainly a key factor. I think another example, last year in partnership with GIZ, the ILO launched the Asian Garment Hub, which is an online presence, a forum to share resources, knowledge and approaches on how to address labour rights in value chains. And this really came as a direct response to this growing request that we as an organisation feel by the industry that I work in to facilitate better sharing of knowledge, to create better platforms for collaboration that are inclusive, in which many different organisations can share practice and access tools and approaches. And there are many different themes that have come out of those consultations, as soon as they're identified, it creates an opportunity for people to come together and address them. One example was the Women's Leadership Programme that the ILO facilitated at the back end of last year, which is a series of training and other interventions that promoted best practice in approaches to gender equality and leadership in the sector. And that's just one example of, I think, of when you start a forum to collaborate, when it's enabled in the right way, that we can really get some traction on addressing some of the key issues and building capabilities and sharing good practice. I think another important question to ask is, what can we learn about regional cooperation during the pandemic when workers and employers in supply chains had such strong demands for support when demand for their products collapsed, and that was particularly true in the garment sector. And I think one of the things we learned was about the importance of a strong regional voice for manufacturing organizations, for employers' organizations representing manufacturers. And I think one clear expression of that was on the Sustainable Terms of Trade initiative that brought together 13, I think it is, different industry associations from 9 countries in a common platform to really address this question of what are the terms of trade that manufacturers need with their customers that really enable them to address all the social and environmental goods that they're charged with addressing in terms of their contracts with their customers. What are the terms that are needed in order to really to support them to do that, not to undermine them to do that? And this initiative really helped them come together and create a white paper, a kind of manifesto of what they needed, and then begin to engage systematically the industry on how that can come about over time. And so I think that's one example of strong manufacturing voice that seemed to be much more necessary for the future than it perhaps was in the past. I think the pandemic also showed us how quickly priorities for workers and employers can change to protect rights at work and the interregional cooperation can be an important means to support them. And I'm thinking here of when demand collapsed, for example, in garments, when pretty quickly liquidity went out of the supply chain, when large numbers of workers became unemployed and lost income, significant amounts of income, and therefore became, for the first time perhaps in decades, suddenly more vulnerable. The rise of the need for income protection, employment protection, social protections really became clear to everybody, and a key support. I think one initiative that I was involved in, which was started by the IOE, IGC, and the Global Union Industrial, was the call to action in the global garment industry, which really created international cooperation to set social dialogue platforms up in garment producing countries to identify priorities in these areas and collective action that could over time address them. And I think it's another form of example that can really say that we need to look at these kind of areas of collaboration. And with that, perhaps I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you so much. Sorry, colleagues, we're running a bit behind the schedule. So without further ado, we're going to pass on to Linde. The floor is yours, Linde.
Yeah, thank you, Rita. And I think thank you all. It's always difficult being last because so many things already have been said. I'm going to share with you two slides, and because I do view they are important. This is a Amphoria at a glance. I will not speak on each and everything, but what we do is we support our members, which we have 2,500 of, to make sure that when they do business through the supply chain, do it in a responsible and sustainable manner. Through our 2,500 members, many of them are in retail and garment and in textile industry and detail, we reach around 35,000 producers, and we have, close to 35,000 order assessments per year that we monitor. We've got many networks in place, including in two countries that are very, very relevant for us in South Asia, which are India and Bangladesh. We offer, tools and services. Some of them are audit, some of them are assessments, some of them are really making sure that there is access to grievance handling for the speak out change, but also we focus a lot on, I would say, on capacity building. I will come back to that a bit later, I would say, on the next slide, why that is very relevant. As I said, key focus here for South Asia, India and Bangladesh. And the challenges, quite a few of you already shared those. It's about migrant work, it's about poverty, also sometimes rapid economic growth and how do you keep up with rules and legislation here. The gender gap, the informal economy, which is still huge, this lack of social protection, but also understanding of what is human rights and environmental due diligence all about. And what does it mean to conduct business in a responsible manner for everyone? Because it's not the responsibility of big companies or small companies, it's the responsibility of everyone. And I think this collective action, which in essence Amphoria is all about, we are collectively on behalf of the 2,500 members and through them our supply chain, really building an ecosystem, together with all the other actions that businesses take, to build this responsible supply chain. In doing so, we have, as part of our governance, also a stakeholder advisory council where we have many stakeholders engaged, also from Asia. But we also do this through collaboration. And I just pulled out a few logos here of those where we collaborated with in relation specifically to India as well as to Bangladesh. And I apologize for those that I have forgotten here, but they are many. And they represent many topics where we work on, whether it's on advocacy, whether it's on women empowerment, whether that's on forced labor, whether that is on addressing, COVID-19, what you can do to prevent, say, your workforce for, becoming infected. How do you support their families? I think it's a wealth of topics that we are collaborating with locally. And that also brings me to what works. And I heard it already through quite a few of those interventions. It needs to be local, because there's not a global solution, it's not a single solution, it has to be local. I think Elaine already touched upon that one, because the solution will need to be found locally. It needs to be practical and not always theoretical, it needs to be concrete. And I also heard that one with KPIs, or where do you want to manage, where do you want to move to? But it's also about, I would say, joining forces. And that's what this webinar is all about. How do we join forces? How do we leverage, I would say, the power of the network here? And I think that is the key question, because we are all in this ecosystem and we all understand the relevance and the need to work together. But there is many more that not yet understand the relevance of working together. There is still hurdles that they feel it difficult to engage, risk averse, maybe not knowing, unsure about roles and responsibilities. But we can only overcome that if we start talking to each other, but also be upfront and honest about what each other's strengths are and leverage those in order to avoid duplication. And avoiding duplication, that's also what Amphoria is about. We know there is a lot of audit fatigue, and audit is not the solution to everything. It's part of a solution. But if we can avoid audit duplication, it means that we can emphasize resources and focus on other topics to really drive positive impact further. There's two further things I would like to say here, Rita, and also to make sure that we stay within time. What we acknowledge and what we see, and that's not only in Asia, I think it's everywhere, there is still a lot of capacity building needed to really understand what is human rights about, what is the company's responsibility about, what does it mean with upcoming legislation. And we are still in our own bubbles. We understand each other. We know each other. You know, it's like meeting of friends and like-minded minds here also on this webinar. But we need to build bridges to those that are not yet in this bubble. So I think having this capacity building, having these conversations, extremely, extremely important. And the second thing I really would like to underline here is not only about, say, understanding, say, the capacity building, but it's also how Asia fits within the broader ecosystem, where Asia at this point in time, also from an Amphoria perspective, it's more, I would say, the producer and the sourcing country rather than, I would say, where our members come from. How can we shift that balance? Because that's also very relevant, that producers also step up, take their own destiny, really say, I want to drive responsible business conduct myself rather than be driven within the supply chain, because that is the key reason here, I think, to broaden the circle, go out of our bubble, to really make sure that we drive positive impact moving further. And maybe just one last point before I do forget it. Someone mentioned, I forgot who it is, that is how crucial it is to have this safe space. And I think that safe space is important. We all have a responsibility to create that safe space and work collaboratively in leveraging our strengths, not duplicate, and really work on progressing here. I saw a comment coming in that I think that was why I was distracted a bit about whatever, having used the wrong map. If that's the case, I apologize. I just took a picture out of the from Google. It's not meant in any way to indicate anything wrong here. Just wanted to come back on that comment. I think back to Rita, because I think what really would be helpful now if we find spaces where we can work on together and where we dare to challenge each other upon. So back to the conversation.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you to all the speakers, Vijay, Dan, and Linda. Time just flew by, but thank you for sharing the insight, the experience, and of course the lessons learned and how we can strengthen the region. So I'm going to pass on to Matthias, who's going to for the last session of this discussion. Thank you. Over to you, Matthias.
Thank you so much. And again, I would encourage everyone who is not on YouTube or in any other internet site to post the questions or your comments you might have into the chat. In the meantime, what I was wondering, many of these multi-stakeholder initiatives, many of the collective actions focus on one sector, right? You have a garment or cocoa or any other kind of commodity. And I'm sometimes wondering, don't we need stronger cross-sectoral collective action? Because as Elaine has said, the danger is that we get rich children in one sector, but they're going directly into the other sector, right? And it is also when looking at the solution and engaging with government, increasing leverage to ensure that there are not 200 children into one classroom, right? And that they don't have to walk for miles and miles in the morning to reach a school. So how can we better perhaps connecting the different dots between these multi-stakeholder initiatives in order to have these cross-sectoral engagement and fertilization? And I see, Linde, you directly want to come in. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Matthias, because I think it's absolutely a great remark, because sometimes we do work within sectors, and to some extent it makes sense, right? Because every sector has its specifics. But there's also the recognition that many of the systemic problems are not sector specific. I think within Afori, I just mentioned, that there is a strong focus on garment and retail, not only, and everyone is welcome, so to say, because what we do also in capacity building is not only for one specific sector. I think this is applicable to all. And I think that IOE exactly does the same in doing so, or the employers federations do the same. So yes, that's absolutely true. But it doesn't take away that you also need to have specific approaches for specific issues in specific sectors. So it's and, I would say.
I guess absolutely that's correct. But I think what can be strengthened is indeed is making the better or connecting better the dots between these different initiatives sometimes, in order also not to have this silo approach where you are in one region, in one country, right? And then instead of working in parallel with each other together. I'm wondering whether from the regie we can bring in also the colleagues from the first panel, because these are also very much questions, of course, which affects them. And that would be great to be able to have Peter, for instance, within our group here. I think the ILO can play an important role. The ILO is a convener. Dan Rees is showing that with the Better Work program. Within the ILO, we will have a technical meeting on global supply chains in June, and where we try to build blocks, or we try to develop building blocks, what they are in order to address decent work deficits in global supply chain. And any hint from you who are really the practitioners, what you think the ILO can do better? Now, Dan, for you is of course a difficult challenge because you are ILO staff. So I don't hold you accountable to and do that, but I really would like to know what you think, all colleagues, what would be a building block for the ILO to support responsible business conduct in the region? Anyone has an idea? Elaine, you are nodding with your head, so I directly take you.
No, I mean, we've worked with the ILO for many, many years. I think the first thing we need to understand is that work around human rights and improving labor standards is not a competitive issue. What the ILO needs to do, though, is to stop talking as though they are not for profit and understand what it means to implement the standards and the conventions that are being signed up to at global level. So that's the main advice that I would have for the ILO firstly, is learn the language of business, make sure that it's not a competitive issue when a company seeks to address human rights in its supply chain, and then demonstrate scale up by working with its 3 tripartite agencies. It is an amazing vehicle, but it needs to move beyond policy into understanding practice and being catalytic.
Anyone else who wants to come in? Just as a trigger, I mean, Peter, yeah, first you, Peter, and then you're muted.
So maybe the earlier point as well. I mean, I think the ILO is incredibly important, very necessary, but I think what we're also seeing maybe more of, which I think is good, is the pillar 1 in the UN guiding principles is about the state's duty to protect. And too often we're trying to get business to, if you like, meet the failures, which are actually failures in governance. If you look at child labour, it's as much to do with education provision, social security and so forth, as it is a business issue. So there's this unique role that the ILO has with its stewardship of the conventions and with the states being parties to start to be strong enough to hold states to account, because business cannot be expected to solve all these issues. And unless you get that driver where the state is playing its full role, including holding business to account, we are not going to drive some of these systemic issues out of the world that we live in.
Spoken out of my heart, I must say. And it is, of course, the supervisory machinery of the ILO is to play an important role, but also the UN supervisory machinery, right? The universal peer review of the Human Rights Council. And in fact, the ILO is in contact with the chair of the Human Rights Council, the Argentinian ambassador, how we can engage in a stronger brainstorming to strengthen universal peer review, to hold governments accountable to do their job, right? The duty to protect. Vijay, you want to come in?
Yes, am I audible to you, Matthias?
Perfect.
Okay. I would like to answer your specific question. I would like to try to make it more specific as much as I can see. What ILO can do more? I'm trying to answer that. ILO, I have been working with, I have industry experience of 40 plus years. And I have been part of these tripartite meetings at the Government of India level. I'm also lucky enough to be part of 3 national, subnational committees of employee state insurance corporations, which is one of the largest medical insurance companies in the world. And I have been working with ILO for the last 4 to 5 years. As somebody rightly said, industry cannot solve all the problems. Because they have to deal with their own problems of sustainability, they have to deal with their own problems of survival. Pandemic has made things very, very difficult. What ILO can do more, according to me, if I make you only one suggestion right now, it should be known to more and more industry people. I'm using the word, it should be known, because my experience of working with the industry, many industry professionals still do not know about ILO, unfortunately, despite the fantastic work that it has been doing. I have been truly overwhelmed by the quantity, by the quality of work that ILO and IOE is doing. But do industry people, are they aware of ILO? Hardly anybody. Hardly anybody. And therefore, I should feel that ILO should work with the governments, and ILO should voluntarily go to the colleges, should go to the educational institutions and make itself known. You see, I come from industry level, and what I suggest will be something very, very at the ground level. And that's what I have suggested to you. I should make itself known more and more. This is what I honestly feel. That's where I will stop, Matthias. I know I have been very ground level response I have given to you.
No, it's very true, actually. It is very true. Dan, as an ILO employee, ILO staff, what is your take?
So let me not answer directly your question as you phrased it, but I think, I work in this space between a business and our national constituents and global business. And I think a lot of what we're talking about in business and human rights is about what the onus on business to do its due diligence in the manner that's communicated in the UNGPs, and then I think is going to be increasingly codified in this movement that we're seeing from soft to hard law, particularly in Europe, on this mandatory human rights due diligence. And I think so I won't ask the question, what should ILO do more? But I think what business can do more in a business to business conversation is to really unpack what they are doing in the supply chain, and really ask the question, how can I implement my programs? So we're talking about cooperation. We need more cooperation between business for sure. But how do I implement my programs, which are private programs, in a way that supports and do not undermine the role of government, but also sometimes I see employers and workers organizations. It's sometimes the dynamic is, and I understand this within businesses, is we must have our program, we're accountable to all our stakeholders, we must do our due diligence, but I think we really need to ask the question, how can you do that in a way that promotes sustainable change? Because it's been said by many actors, no business can act alone, neither should it. The days of that have gone. So how do we actually implement programs that are really building the capacity of government to do their job and kind of holding them to account? And I think we have to close that silo between the pillars and the UNGPs in a meaningful way. And I think business voice is really important in this, in leading business and proposing.
Thank you, Dan. And I think, you know, when it comes to the business voice, often I have the feeling we need a much more mature debate, because if this business is open, you know, they're often criticized being for whatever position they take on a certain issues. You know, I'm paid for that to be criticized. I have no problem with it. But of course, if you are a company which, you know, is a branding, you are consumer facing, then you might have challenges, right? And that is what you pointed out, the need to really engage with employers organization and to take, you know, don't engage with one company, but this one company is first of all not the representative of the whole business sector. And more importantly, it might be even constrained what it can say because of the different pressure in the public. Linde, you worked for a company, you worked for the Federation, you were my boss for a long time, and now you work for Amphori. You have really, from all sides, the perspective.
Yeah, and I was a bit, you know, about say how this conversation is turning about we should do more to promote the ILO. And yes, that's all being true. And yes, a lot of people in the world don't know about the ILO, but you have to ask yourself the question, how many people really do need to know the ILO? Because where is it relevant for their day-to-day work? So I think we need to also be a bit realistic. I'm not saying by no means that the ILO is not important. It has a crucial role. You know, I think that the fact that it's the only tripartite institution in the UN, I think that's great. A lot of things can be moved on. But what we need to do from a business perspective, and that's coming back to language, it's explain to them where things come from and what they need to do. And whether that's ILO or any other institution for business, that's maybe not so much relevant. They need to understand, you know, what's the meaning of it, where's they need to adhere to, and what is the business benefit and what is the expectations for stakeholders. And for me, whether we explain that in number A, B, or C, for me, that's not really that relevant. And I always reflect back when I talk with friends in the Netherlands, many of them don't know about the ILO. But if I then explain to them that the national laws in the Netherlands, where we talk about working time, they directly come from the International Labour Standards, that's where it makes sense. So I think we need to make that bridge, but not focus so much about, you know, we need to make the ILO more well known, that it's well known within those that need to know. So just wanted to reflect on that statement. Thank you.
Thank you. But I really believe that the ILO has a lot of convening power, and we have seen that in Qatar. It was about ending the kafala system. We have seen it in Uzbekistan addressing child enforced labor. And when you look in Qatar, it's not only about ending the kafala system, but there are important projects, for instance, where the ILO was able to build fair recruitment corridors from Bangladesh, from the region to Qatar, because it's of course also very true that workers in the region face human rights challenges, not only in the region, but as migrant workers everywhere, not only the Middle East, but, you know, wherever they go. So there are huge challenges where making these internationally connecting the dots or cross-regionally connecting the dots is so important, and where I believe the ILO can play an important role. The problem is, for me, I don't see this chat function. There, Jason came in. But Jason, I can't read so quickly the long text. You write too long. You might want to directly come in what you have to add. Sure.
No, my question to you, dear panelists, was that the trust element is usually key to make any initiative, business operations a success. And I would like to know your views on how to make this happen, how to increase the trust elements among all stakeholders.
Starts with talking to each other.
Talking to each other for sure. But Peter, you want to come in?
I mean, my experience is this is one of those small words that is easy to say and actually quite difficult to develop. And you can read a book, go on a training course, meet up over sort of Zoom meetings. I think our experience is trust is best built when you're actually doing something together. So when you actually commit to tackling something, preferably not all the world's problems in one go, because that's quite difficult, but you start to build on things, build those relationships, build the language, build the trust. And that's true whether it's at local community level or business to business or international level. And again, there are great examples of that at all those different levels. But I think there is no replacement here for the hard work of actually doing something and building those relationships.
I agree. And my feeling, though, is that there's also this personal component, isn't it? Right? That, you know, even if an organization is an organization, at the end of the day, it is very much also about the leading figures, whether, you know, the harmony is there and whether they can with each other or they can't with each other. So there's always this personal aspect. I'm sometimes wondering how we can kick off this collective action, right? I want to be honest with you. We're trying to be engaging in the recycling sector in Mexico on, you know, really getting the children off the dump sites there, because recycling everywhere in the world, not everywhere, in too many countries in the world, works like the lorry comes, push off the garbage, right? And then the families living on the dump sites collect bottles to bottles, paper to paper. And how to really get everyone equally excited like we are, right? Sometimes seems a real challenge to do that. So how to build momentum? I sometimes really wonder, yeah, how do you do that, right? You have, of course, an approach where you come from top down, because there's in the supervisory machinery a case, and that was the case in Qatar, in ending the kafala system, right? That was triggering the action. It was the same in Uzbekistan. There might be other events which trigger action, like in Bangladesh, Rana Plaza. But how we can, you know, engage in this without having a supervisory machinery case or a catastrophe which happening, and just, you know, start tackling the problems. Linda, you were first.
Yeah, and I recognize all these say the big world's problems, and I was also involved in Qatar, and, you know, ILO did a great job there in convening things. Don't get me wrong there. But now let's go back to Amfori here. What for Amfori is extremely important is that we have a voice on the ground. So that's where we have in the countries where we have either many members or many producers, we have a network representative that's representing Amfori, that is connecting the dots, say, with the local players, whether that's being members or that's being, say, suppliers to our members, and align with them what action and what support that they need, and then build the alliances on the ground on the topics that our members and our suppliers of our members have a need to be supported on. And through this, that's also why I put on my slide, say, this local action, which then also comes back to people who have a network in place, who know, you know, how to connect, whether that's on, say, migrant workers, whether that's on refugees, whether that's on women empowerment principles, whether that's on violence at work or living wage. They need to convene, I would say, the conversations and bring the people together. So I think that the person on the ground matters. Thanks.
Thank you, Linda. Elaine. You're muted.
2 years after COVID, Peter, I still can't get it right. For me, trust is built over time. And trust is more than just saying, I'm here, trust me. It's about walking in the shoes of the rights holder you need in order to hear what they have to say. To demonstrate trust, when you give someone a seat at the table, you actually have to listen to what they have to say. And sometimes I'm hugely conflicted by the fact that we don't listen. And if you don't listen, then trust is breached. It's more, we need more than words. We need more than just talking. We need to listen, and then we need to act. And then trust is restored, trust is rebuilt, and you have a longer term partner for life. Again, no one can do this on their own. No one should be excluded from this conversation. But we have to listen when others.
We really need a more inclusive approach to that, where everyone is on the table, because what we see is there's a trend that less and less people are seen good enough to be on the table, right? And that is, you know, more and more sectors are taken out because for whatever reason, and that is a challenge. When there's only very few people or very few companies left who are allowed basically to be on the table. Dan, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, just a couple of things on trust. I mean, and I think Elaine said it very well, but I think safe space is hugely important. And normally when you launch an initiative like the one you've described in Mexico, you're asking people to take real risks, and not just businesses. But and I think the importance of safe space, I think the importance of really understanding and respecting people's roles. So I totally agree with Elaine about voice, but also, you know, different stakeholders have different roles. And I think collaboration has to be built on what those roles are. and respecting them. And then I think transparency is just hugely important. So transparency of process and to a certain extent, I've just become a firm believer that the process needs to allow the different stakeholders to create together, to imagine together, to design together, not one of those processes that comes in and tells them how it should all be done. So I think starting with the problem and defining solutions together is a fantastic way to build trust if it can be achieved.
Thank you. And I think that was a great last word, so to say. I just wanted to remind everyone that from the 15th to 20th of May, the 5th Global Conference on Child Labor takes place in Durban. They take place every 5 years. So it is not like an event you have directly next year again. It is every 5 years. It's important. It's important in order to know where we are, also to get into collective action, try to work together how to eradicate child labor and also human trafficking and forced labor. Durban, of course, is a great town. It's a lot of fun. It's Indian Ocean, always warm water. I really encourage everyone to come. 1,000 people are expected to be there and 1,000 people are expected to join online. So if you don't want to have the beach, you also can join online and staying in wherever you are. So register for that event. I think it's important that we are there and to make that a success. And secondly, join the IOE in this endeavor. Rita Yip is our key person, a key contact person when it is about child labor. We have on Monday a preparatory session where we go not only through the agenda and what are the different items, but where we're also looking, what should be the key priority for business in this conference and in the outcome document which is coming out of Durban. So I put the link into the chat, which you can directly register. Otherwise, when you are on YouTube, you go on the IE website, which is always a good address to be anyway, and there you can find everything. The registration link for Monday as well as the registration link for Durban itself. With that, thank you so much to Jason, first of all, who really got gray hair in organizing this. So thank you, Jason. And this was not because of the panelists, but because of sometimes being in this bigger forum is challenging. Thank you so much, Rita, for joining us here and hosting a panel. And thank you to the organizer and to make this work, all the journalistic behind. And thank you to all of you for being here. So hope to see you in Durban and before on Monday. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.